Hey, welcome back to the Sleepy Historian. Tonight we're heading somewhere rough, somewhere dry, dusty, and dangerously unpredictable. So settle in, find your blanket, let your muscles go heavy, and imagine this. You open your eyes and you're no longer in your cozy bedroom. Instead, you're lying on a straw mattress in a wooden shack with sunlight streaming through the cracks. You hear the buzz of a fly near your ear, the jingle of spurs outside, and a wind that doesn't cool, it scrapes. You've just woken up in the Wild West, and I've got bad news for you. You're not going to last long. Let's begin with the basics. You're in a frontier town in the 1870s. Not the glamorous west of Hollywood, but the real one. Raw, cruel, and barely held together by nails and liquor. This town? It isn't much. A saloon, a livery stable, maybe a general store. The roads are just dirt, baked hard by the sun and coated with a thick layer of horse manure and sawdust. You step outside, and boom, the sun hits you like a hammer. It's not warm. It's hostile. There's no sunscreen, no hat, no water bottle, just dry air that pulls the moisture right out of your skin and leaves your lips cracked like canyon walls. You squint into the brightness. Everything is brown, faded, and loud. Wagon wheels creak, dogs bark, a distant hammer clangs on metal, and every man you pass sizes you up. Not with a smile, but with a look that says, are you a threat? Are you weak? Or are you worth robbing? Because out here, there's no real law. There's a sheriff, sure, but he's just one man with a rusty badge and a tired horse. Most folks settle things the old-fashioned way. A punch, a knife, or a bullet. And speaking of bullets, you better get used to the sound of gunfire. Now, let's talk food. Hungry? You won't find a hot breakfast waiting. No fresh coffee, no toast. Maybe you'll get some beans if you're lucky, or dried jerky so tough it might pull a tooth. There's no refrigeration, so everything smells just a little off. You chew and chew and chew, because that's your only real option. And water? It's questionable. The well outside town is murky, with a weird film on top. But you drink anyway, because you have to. And then your stomach starts to gurgle, because you forgot the golden rule out here. Boil it or bury it. If you don't, well, dysentery's always happy to pay a visit. Suddenly, you're sweating bullets and stuck in an outhouse that hasn't been cleaned in months. And that outhouse? It's just a pit in the ground with a wooden seat. No toilet paper, just corn cobs or old newspaper. If you're lucky. Still think you're surviving the day? But we haven't even talked about clothes yet. You're wearing stiff, scratchy wool. Why? Because cotton's expensive. Your boots don't fit right. Blisters are forming, and you realize quickly that your feet are going to be your main mode of transportation. Horses are costly, and dangerous, and moody. You think you might sit down for a rest, maybe on that barrel by the saloon? But then a man stumbles out, drunk at 10 a.m., and starts shouting about poker, cheating, and someone named Big Jack. You don't want to find out who Big Jack is. You walk the other way. But walking's dangerous too, because rattlesnakes don't care that you're new. Scorpions hide in your boots, and if you're really unlucky, you might cross paths with a mountain lion or a bear. By now, you're exhausted, you're sunburned, dehydrated, maybe bleeding, and it's only noon. It's high noon in the Wild West. The sun has climbed even higher, and there's no mercy in it. There are no trees, no clouds, no shade, just you. Just you, the baked earth, and a sky so wide it makes you feel like an ant. The dust kicks up with every step. It gets into your eyes, your mouth, your lungs. You taste grit, your teeth grind with it. And that dry cough you just gave? Get used to it. Because welcome to prairie lung, cowboy. A slow, steady irritation caused by years of breathing in nothing but dirt. You start wondering if maybe you should find some help. Someone to guide you, someone who knows the land. But out here, strangers don't trust each other. Not easily. Every conversation feels like a standoff. Eyes flick to your belt. Are you armed? To your boots. Are you a ranch hand or a drifter? To your hands. Rough or soft? Have you worked or have you stolen? You try the saloon, thinking maybe a drink will help. Inside, it's dim and loud. Piano music plays badly. Card games fill the back tables, along with cigar smoke and a sense that violence is always just one losing hand away. You sit at the bar and order a drink. The whiskey hits your throat like fire. It's cheap, harsh, probably mixed with turpentine. You notice something odd. Everyone here looks older than they probably are. Wrinkled, weather-beaten. Because out here, life doesn't give you time to age gracefully. It carves you up with sun, wind, and hard living. The bartender gives you a look like he's seen too many of your kind. Green, soft, outsiders who don't last the week. You glance at the wanted posters on the wall, yellowed paper, faded ink, names with rewards scrawled underneath. Some of them, $50, $100,000, dead or alive, mostly dead. You realize something then. There's no real safety here. Even if you follow every rule, even if you smile and nod and mind your own business, someone could still decide you looked at them wrong. And just like that, bang. There are no forensics, no courts, no appeals, just one lawman, one grave. So you leave. You walk out, blinking into the sun again, and make your way down the main road. A woman passes you in a bonnet, carrying a basket. You nod politely. She doesn't nod back, because respect out here isn't free. It's earned through survival. You hear the blacksmith hammering in the distance, metal on metal, sharp and rhythmic. You wander over. He's working without gloves, sweat pouring down his face, arms covered in burn scars. He doesn't stop as you approach, just glances once, says nothing. Because in the Wild West, time is survival, and conversation, that's a luxury. Behind him, a young boy is shoveling coal into a furnace, maybe 10 years old. No school, no play, just work. You feel your stomach turn again, still not right from that bad water. You ask someone about a doctor. They laugh. Doctors out here are, well, they exist. Usually just one old man with a dusty bag of tools and a bottle of morphine. Surgery means biting down on leather and praying you don't die from infection. Antibiotics? Sterilization? Not invented yet. The most common cure for everything from fever to a broken arm? Whiskey. And hope. Maybe you get lucky. Maybe someone offers you a place to rest. A bunk in a bunkhouse. A shared cot with strangers. No pillows, just rough wool blankets crawling with lice. You try to sleep, but the air is still hot. It smells like sweat and old hay. Outside, coyotes howl in the distance. A gunshot cracks. Someone curses. You lie there, wide-eyed, realizing this place isn't just rough. It's alive. And you are not welcome. In the next part, we'll look at what it meant to face danger from the land itself. Storms, animals, and nature's quiet, brutal ways of testing you. Sleep tight. All right, still with us? Because we're just getting started. You've survived the first few hours in the Wild West, but now you're learning something even tougher than the dust and danger. The land doesn't care about you, at all. Let's talk about the weather. It's not just hot, it's unpredictable, unforgiving. 1 minute it's sun-bleached skies and still air, and the next, you see the horizon shift. A wall of brown rising fast, a dust storm. There's no warning system, no alerts on your phone. You just see it coming, rolling like thunder, but silent until it hits. And when it hits, you can't breathe. You cover your face with your shirt, but the dirt still gets in. Into your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your lungs. It's like drowning in sand. You stumble, blind, reaching for shelter that isn't there. And if you're caught too far from town, out on the prairie or the trail, you could disappear in it. Literally, people did. They'd lose their way in a dust storm, wander in circles, fall, and never get up again. But maybe the storm passes, you survive. Great. Now the temperature drops, fast. That blazing heat turns into an icy wind the second the sun goes down. Because desert climates don't play fair. You were sweating just hours ago. Now you're shivering. And you've got nothing but your dusty clothes to keep you warm. No fleece, no heater, just a campfire, if you're lucky enough to build one. And even that could attract the wrong attention. Because you're not alone out here. Wolves are watching from the edges of the dark. Mountain lions too. And snakes, they're not sleeping. They're hiding in your boots, your bedroll, your saddlebag. One wrong step and fangs. Venom. And out here, there's no anti-venom, just pain. And whatever prayers you remember, even the land beneath you is a threat. Tumbleweeds look harmless, right? Not when they whip at you in high wind like a nest of thorns. And quicksand, it's real, not just in the movies. You think you're walking across dry riverbed, then down you go. Not swallowed whole like in cartoons, but stuck, sinking slowly, wasting energy, until it takes hours to free yourself, if you even can. And then, just when you think you've seen it all, the sky opens up. Rain, but not the kind you want. Because this isn't gentle rain, it's flash flood rain, the kind that turns dry creek beds into raging rivers in minutes. You're caught in a gulch, water rising fast. There's no lifeguard, no high ground. You better run, fast. But mud slows you down, so does your gear. And just like that, your boots are underwater, and you're next. So let's review. The land here, it's not beautiful, it's brutal. And yet, people lived here. They built homes here. They raised families here. Which means survival wasn't just about dealing with nature, it was about preparing for it. Knowing the land, reading the sky, carrying the right gear, even if it weighed 40 pounds. You have none of that. No instincts, no training, no time to learn. And then there's fire. Out here, fire is a tool and a terror. Light your campfire wrong, and it could catch the brush. And the brush could catch the hill. And suddenly the entire valley is burning. No fire trucks, no emergency lines, just men with shovels, trying to dig dirt lines between their homes and the flames. But maybe you make it through the night. You don't freeze, you don't burn, you don't get eaten. Congratulations. But now, you're starving. Your food's gone. So you have to hunt, which brings its own problems. Because animals don't just walk into your frying pan. You have to track them, shoot them, clean them, gut them. And most people couldn't stomach that, literally. One whiff of the smell and you're gagging. But if you don't eat, you don't last. There's no store down the block, no delivery service. You're your own butcher, your own cook, your own backup plan. And out here, even one mistake can be fatal. In the next part, we'll look at what happened when people, not nature, were the threat. Bandits, outlaws, duels, and the rules of violence on the edge of civilization. So rest up, you're gonna need it. Welcome back to the Sleepy Historian. You made it through the desert, the cold, the hunger, and the dust. But now it's time to talk about something even more dangerous than rattlesnakes or flash floods. People. That's right, because in the Wild West, your fellow humans might be your biggest threat. This wasn't a world of safety nets. There was no police department patrolling 24/7, no security cameras, no forensic investigations. In fact, most of the time, you were your own law enforcement. And if someone didn't like you, they might just shoot you in the street. Let's say you walk into a saloon. You're thirsty, your feet ache. You're hoping for a drink, maybe a break. But the saloon isn't a cozy lounge. It's crowded, it's loud, it stinks of whiskey, cigar smoke, and sweat. You push through swinging doors and instantly feel the weight of eyes on you. Strangers sizing you up. Men slouched at poker tables, guns casually resting on their hips. Bartenders who've seen it all and don't want trouble. You take a seat, and then you make a mistake. You stare too long at someone. Or worse, you accidentally brush into a cowboy's shoulder without apologizing. He stands up slow, his boots thud on the wooden floor. You got a problem, friend? That word, friend, drips with menace. Your heart races, your palms sweat, and you realize you're seconds away from a gunfight you never asked for. Because here, respect is everything. And disrespect, even the accidental kind, can get you shot. Welcome to the world of honor culture. In this society, your reputation isn't just about pride, it's about survival. Lose respect and you lose protection. You become a target. That's why so many disagreements ended in duels. Not the clean, elegant 10 paces turn and fire scenes you see in movies. Nope. These were often chaotic, messy, spur-of-the-moment shootouts. Sometimes in the street, sometimes in a saloon, sometimes at high noon. But more often, at whatever time tempers exploded. And even if you survived, you didn't always walk away clean. Wounds got infected. Bullets weren't surgically removed. They were dug out with whatever tool was nearby. Whiskey as anesthesia. A dirty knife as your surgeon. And don't even think about going to a hospital. Most towns didn't have one. Doctors were rare. And if you found one, their qualifications might just be owning a saw and not passing out at blood. That's if you're lucky. Because often you wouldn't find a doctor at all. Just a traveling barber surgeon or a medicine man selling tonics that were mostly alcohol, opium, or both. Now, let's say you don't get into a fight. Let's say you just want to keep to yourself, earn a living. So you buy a small plot of land. You try to raise cattle or grow crops. Sounds peaceful, right? Wrong. Because out here, land is power. And if you own something, someone else wants it. Cattle rustlers, claim jumpers, rival ranchers, even the local sheriff might be crooked. And if someone decides to take your land, there might not be a single thing you can do, unless you fight. And suddenly, your peaceful life is a range war, you versus them. Guns blazing, barns burning, families caught in the crossfire. This wasn't rare. Some towns were full-on battlegrounds. Feuds could last for years. Entire family lines wiped out. And justice? Let's talk about that. If you were the victim of a crime, your options were slim. The sheriff might be away, or drunk, or working for the man who robbed you. There were courts, yes, but trials were slow, biased, and inconsistent. Juries were made up of locals who might know the accused, or be scared of them. And if you got convicted, prison wasn't much better. Small wooden jails with weak locks and dirt floors. Guards who might look the other way for a price. And if a mob wanted you gone, well, then came vigilante justice. That's right, mobs dragging suspects from cells, hanging them from trees or lampposts. No trial, no defense, just ropes and rage. They called it frontier justice. Swift, brutal, and final. And the worst part, sometimes they got the wrong guy, and nobody paid for it. So yeah, if you thought the Wild West was all horses and heroics, think again. It was a world where danger wore a human face, where a bad look or a land dispute could end your story early. In the next part, we'll dive into the silent suffering, disease, medicine, or lack thereof, and what happened when your body failed and help was miles away. Get ready. It's about to get even harder to survive. Still think you'd survive? Let's talk about something quieter than bullets and more deadly than outlaws. Disease. The Wild West wasn't just a battleground, it was a breeding ground. You see, back then, germs weren't really understood. Bacteria, viruses, those were invisible enemies, and most people didn't believe in what they couldn't see. So when folks got sick, they chalked it up to bad air or an imbalance of the humors. And their remedies? Let's just say, you wouldn't want any. Say you wake up with a fever. You're sweating, your bones ache, your mouth is dry. You think you just caught a chill, right? Wrong. It could be typhoid, or dysentery, or cholera, especially if you've been drinking water from that muddy river. Because water out here wasn't clean. Towns didn't have filtration systems. Wells were often shared. And it only took one infected animal or one sick human to poison the whole thing. Once cholera hit, it spread fast. Vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration. People could die within hours. And when the outbreak started, people ran. Families abandoned homes, entire camps shut down. Mass graves were dug in haste. And if it wasn't cholera, there were plenty of other ways to suffer. Take smallpox. It swept through communities like wildfire, especially in close quarters, covered wagons, crowded saloons, military forts. Once one person was infected, everyone around them was a target. And the symptoms? Boils, fever, delirium, skin peeling in sheets. It left survivors scarred for life. If they survived at all, vaccination existed, but it was primitive, and most people feared it. They'd rather try snake oil and prayers than a procedure they didn't understand. And when children were born, it was a gamble. Infant mortality rates were sky high. 1 in 5 babies didn't live past their first year. Mothers risked their lives giving birth. No hospitals, no epidurals, just a midwife, a hot towel, and hope. Let's say you don't fall victim to disease. You're healthy until you're not. You break your arm in a fall. You cut your leg on barbed wire. You catch your hand in a rusty trap. Out here, that isn't just painful, it's dangerous. Because a cut could turn septic, a fracture could go untreated, a dislocated shoulder might never heal right. And the treatments? Boil some water, pour whiskey on the wound, bite down on leather, pray the fever doesn't come. Sometimes, amputation was the only option. And anesthesia? Maybe morphine if you were lucky. Otherwise, it was just strong men holding you down and a saw moving fast. That's not an exaggeration. There are journals, first-hand accounts of frontier doctors removing limbs in barns or kitchens, wiping blades on their aprons between patients. Sanitation wasn't a priority. Speed was. And even worse, there were traveling doctors, con men with wagons full of colorful bottles. They claimed to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak, but most of their tonics were just mixtures of alcohol, laudanum, opium, or cocaine. You'd feel great for an hour, and then worse than ever. Addiction was common, especially for women who were often prescribed opium for nerves or hysteria. And mental illness? Forget treatment. Depression, trauma, anxiety, these were labeled as weakness or madness. If someone couldn't function, they were locked in a room, sent away, or left to wander the plains alone. There were asylums, but they were terrifying, overcrowded, understaffed, and abusive. You didn't want to end up in one. Nobody did. So most people just endured. They suffered in silence. They worked through pain. They buried their dead and moved on. Because out here, pain was part of life. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone carried wounds on their bodies or in their hearts. There were no therapists, no recovery leave, no support groups, just you, your chores, and the next sunrise. And speaking of the dead, let's talk about death, because it came fast and often. If you died on the trail, you might get buried in a shallow grave, rocks piled high to keep animals out. If you died in town, maybe someone carved your name into a wooden cross, if they remembered it. Cemeteries were often just dusty plots. No fancy coffins, no embalming, just a quick goodbye and a slow return to the earth. Life expectancy? It was short. People aged fast. A 40-year-old looked 60. A 60-year-old was a rare sight. Children became adults by necessity. Girls married at 14. Boys worked like men by 10. This was survival, not comfort, not dreams, just grit and luck. And most days, even that wasn't enough. In the next part, we'll look at how people found hope despite it all, through community, resilience, and sometimes sheer defiance of the odds. Because while most wouldn't survive the Wild West, some did. And their stories are nothing short of incredible. Now imagine you're not just trying to survive, you're trying to live. to build a life, to find something resembling joy in a world that constantly tries to crush it. Because while the Wild West was brutal, people didn't just sit around waiting to die. They adapted. They formed communities, found love, raised children, and somehow made it all feel normal. Let's talk about what that looked like. You're living in a small frontier town, a scattering of wooden buildings surrounded by vast empty land. There's a saloon, a general store, maybe a blacksmith, and a church. That's it. No movie theaters, no malls, no delivery apps. Your entertainment? Each other. People gathered in the saloon after sunset, not just for drinking, but for music, dancing, and storytelling. A piano player might bang out a ragtime tune while someone reads aloud from a tattered newspaper 3 weeks old. And Saturday nights? That was the big event. Barn dances, community dinners, church socials. A rare moment to forget the hardships and just be human. And yes, people still fell in love. Courting was often slow and very public. A young man might show up at a girl's house with a fresh pie and help mend the fence. Maybe they'd sit on the porch together, barely touching, talking in hushed tones while the rest of the family listened from inside. Marriage wasn't just romantic, it was survival. A strong partner meant more hands to work the land, raise livestock, and face down whatever came next. And speaking of work, there was always work, dawn till dusk. For men, it might be farming, trapping, hunting, blacksmithing, or carpentry. For women, it was cooking, washing, sewing, tending children, preserving food, mending clothes, feeding animals. And everyone was expected to pull their weight, even the kids. You'd rise before the sun, eat a simple breakfast, maybe cornbread and beans, then get to it. No weekends off, no sick days, just the rhythm of the land. In spring, you planted. In summer, you labored. In fall, you harvested. In winter, you tried to stay alive. And winter was hard. Biting winds, freezing nights, snowdrifts taller than a man. No central heating, just a wood stove, and hope you chopped enough firewood in October. If the winter dragged on too long, supplies would run low. Families would ration food. Sometimes they had to slaughter the last of their animals or melt snow just to drink. There are stories, grim ones, of entire families starving, and of neighbors sharing their last sack of flour to keep others alive. Because despite everything, the Wild West wasn't all isolation and violence. It was also community, dependence. Because one person alone couldn't survive, but together sometimes they could. Now imagine you're sick and bedridden during one of those long winters. The doctor can't make it. The roads are impassable. Your neighbor rides through the snow with a jar of chicken broth and a bottle of whiskey. That's how people survived. Not because they were stronger, but because they looked out for each other. And still, tragedy came. Fires, floods, droughts, locusts. One dry summer could wipe out your entire crop. A spark from a stove could reduce your home to ash. A thunderstorm could drown your livestock. And there were no bailouts, no insurance, no relief funds. You rebuilt or you left. Some packed up everything and moved on. Others stayed, started over, and carved a life from ruin. That kind of resilience is hard to imagine today. Now let's talk about law and order. Because the Wild West had its own rules, and breaking them could be fatal. Towns didn't always have sheriffs. Sometimes justice came in the form of vigilante groups. If someone stole from the wrong person, they might find themselves facing a mob with torches and rope. Trials were quick or non-existent. And duels, they happened. Two men standing in the street, hands twitching near their holsters, the whole town watching. It wasn't as common as movies suggest, but it was real. And sometimes, a sheriff was worse than the criminals. Corruption ran deep, bribes, favoritism, violence used as currency. Outlaws didn't always wear masks, sometimes they wore badges. But even in this chaos, people built something lasting. They formed governments, elected officials, established schools, because education, despite everything, mattered. Teachers were often young women, barely older than their students. Classrooms were one-room shacks with a potbelly stove in the middle. No fancy supplies, just slates, chalk, and sheer determination. And school was a privilege. Not everyone could go. Some kids had to work the farm. Some never learned to read. But those who did, who clung to books like lifelines, often grew up to be the backbone of these communities. So despite the sickness, the violence, the unrelenting work, people hoped. They hoped for better harvests, for healthy babies, for letters from home, for just one more sunrise. In the next part, we'll step deeper into the myths versus the reality of cowboy life. Because while they've become legends in our stories, their real lives were messier, grittier, and more heartbreaking than most would dare imagine. So let's peel back the dusty curtain on one of the most iconic figures of the Wild West, the cowboy. You probably picture a weathered man in a wide-brimmed hat, leather chaps, revolver at his side, and that eternal slow swagger. Maybe he's strumming a tune by the fire or galloping across the plains with the wind in his hair. But the reality? Far less glamorous. For starters, most cowboys didn't own the land they rode across. They worked for ranchers, driving massive herds of cattle across hundreds of miles, through storms, rivers, snake-infested plains, and hostile territory. This wasn't some adventure holiday. It was brutal, filthy, and often soul-crushing labor. You'd rise before dawn, often after sleeping under an open sky. No tent, no mattress, just a blanket and maybe your saddle for a pillow. If it rained, you got wet. If it snowed, you froze. If the wind howled, you endured. You'd wolf down a breakfast of beans or salt pork if you were lucky. Then you'd be in the saddle for 12 to 16 hours, riding herd, steering, controlling, or calming cattle that weighed nearly a ton each. And cattle don't cooperate. They stampede, they wander, they fight each other. They sometimes trample cowboys who get too close. Imagine thousands of hooves pounding the earth, dust rising into your lungs, the stench of manure and sweat clinging to everything. No showers, no deodorant, just rawhide and exhaustion. And what did you get paid for this? About $1 a day. No benefits, no health coverage, no job security. If you got injured, and many did, you were often just left behind. A broken leg could mean permanent disability. A snake bite? Well, you'd better pray someone knew how to cut and suck the venom out, or start writing your goodbyes. Now, let's talk about who these cowboys were. Not all white. In fact, historians estimate that around 25% of all cowboys were black, and many more were Mexican or indigenous. They were often formerly enslaved, displaced, or pushed to the margins of society. For them, cowboy life wasn't a choice. It was the only option. But despite their huge role in the cowboy legacy, these men were written out of the storybooks and movies. So while the cowboy image became mythologized in Hollywood, the rugged white hero with a drawl and a quick draw, the real men who lived that life were often forgotten. And speaking of quick draws, let's clear this one up too. Gunfights didn't happen every day. They were rare, risky, and usually over very quickly. Just a couple of shots and it was done. Most real cowboys avoided them because a gunfight could mean death or jail, and they had work to do. But that didn't mean the Wild West was safe. Let's say you've just finished a month-long cattle drive. You've got your wages in your pocket, your boots are full of blisters, and all you want is a warm meal and a real bed. You roll into Dodge City, Tombstone, or Deadwood. Now you're surrounded by saloons, gamblers, con artists, prostitutes, drunks, and more than a few itchy trigger fingers. You step into a bar, the piano's playing, men are shouting over card games, someone bumps your arm, beer spills. and suddenly all eyes are on you. In that moment, your reputation is everything. Back down too fast, and you're a coward. Act too tough, and you might not make it to sunrise. You see, the Wild West was a place where honor and violence were tightly bound. An insult could lead to a beating or worse. And if you got into trouble, don't expect help from the law. Towns often had one sheriff, maybe a deputy or two, if that. If the sheriff didn't like you, tough luck. Justice wasn't blind. It was often personal. Now let's shift focus to the women of the West. Because contrary to the myths, women weren't just saloon girls or wives waiting on the porch. They were homesteaders, teachers, ranchers, business owners, and yes, sometimes outlaws. Women hauled water, chopped wood, gave birth with no doctors, raised children in sod houses, and worked the land alongside men. Some ran boarding houses or laundries. Others delivered mail on horseback, hunted, even fought off bandits. And they did it in long skirts and corsets. Why? Because fashion was slow to change, and society's expectations were stubborn. But survival had no gender. In the West, if you couldn't pull your weight, you didn't last. One famous figure was Calamity Jane, a sharpshooter, scout, and frontierswoman who dressed like a man and drank like a sailor. Or Stagecoach Mary, a former slave who became the first African-American female mail carrier in the U.S., delivering through the wild Montana frontier with a rifle on her lap. These women weren't side characters. They were legends, because they had to be. And now imagine what passed for healthcare in this world. Doctors were few and far between. Medicine was primitive. There were no antibiotics, no painkillers, no antiseptics. A broken bone? They might set it with wooden splints and hope it healed straight. A bullet wound? They'd dig around with metal tools, unwashed, and pour whiskey over it as the only disinfectant. Surgery often happened on kitchen tables. Anesthesia, if you got it, might be chloroform, if the town had any. Most often, it was bite the leather strap and scream into the wind. And childbirth? A roll of the dice. Many women died in labor. Many babies didn't survive their first year. Infant mortality was high, and grief was a familiar companion. But people kept going, kept building, kept surviving. Because that's what the West demanded. In the next part, we'll take you deep into the dangers of Western travel, across mountain passes, deserts, and treacherous river crossings, where the land itself was the deadliest outlaw of all. So far, we've seen how the Wild West could break a person in body and spirit. But imagine you're not even settled yet. You're still on the move, making your way westward in search of that elusive promise: land, gold, freedom. Now you're crossing thousands of miles of wilderness. No highways, no gas stations, no hotels. Just you, a wagon, and a hope that you packed enough to make it alive. Let's step into the boots of a westward traveler in the 1800s. You've loaded your covered wagon with essentials: flour, beans, lard, dried fruit, rifles, tools, maybe a family Bible. Space is limited, and every extra pound is one more your oxen have to haul. There's no Uber if they get tired. If they die, you're stranded, and you move slow, maybe 10 to 15 miles a day on a good day. The terrain is unforgiving. Dust clouds fill your mouth and eyes as you inch across open plains. Rains turn dirt roads into sucking mud traps. You'll cross rivers with no bridges, inching your wagon through while praying it doesn't tip or wash away. Some families lost everything in those crossings: supplies, heirlooms, even children. And then, the mountains. The Rocky Mountains aren't just tall, they're merciless. Snowstorms can come out of nowhere. Temperatures drop rapidly. Trails become narrow and slippery. Wagons tip. Horses panic. You might have to unload everything and carry it piece by piece up a slope, risking frostbite and altitude sickness. Now picture the desert. The Great Basin and Mojave aren't romantic golden sands. They're death traps. No shade, no water, no forgiveness. You ration every drop. You suck pebbles to keep your mouth moist. You bury the dead beneath crude stone piles and move on because there's no time to grieve. You might see mirages, shimmering oases that vanish the closer you get. Some travelers went mad chasing them. And what if you got injured on the trail? No hospitals, no doctors. A sprained ankle might slow the whole caravan. A fever might spread and take down a dozen people. A simple cut could turn into gangrene. Many didn't survive the trip. Entire wagon parties were lost to illness, exposure, or something worse. Because sometimes the danger wasn't nature, it was other people. As you crossed through disputed territories or lands claimed by indigenous nations, tensions ran high. Some native tribes tried to coexist. Others, pushed to the brink by settlers and betrayal, defended their land fiercely. There were attacks, but there were also countless peaceful exchanges, often erased from history. Still, fear was constant. You'd circle the wagons at night, not just to pen livestock, but as a makeshift fortress. Children learned to sleep with gunfire in the distance. Women kept revolvers in their aprons. Men took turns standing watch under cold starlight. Every creak in the brush could be something coming for you. And speaking of nights, they were terrifying. Imagine crawling into your wagon bed, the canvas flapping, coyotes howling in the distance, the fire barely glowing, and nothing but darkness around you. No lights, no neighbors, just blackness and silence, until it wasn't. And yet, people did this. By the tens of thousands, driven by desperation, by hope, by faith in a dream that maybe there was a better life just over the next ridge. Let's not forget about disease. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery. These weren't distant threats. They were daily killers. One contaminated water source could wipe out an entire group in a week. You'd see someone coughing in the morning, burning with fever by nightfall, and buried by dawn. Many travelers wore scarves soaked in vinegar, believing it would ward off illness. It didn't. Sometimes they hung herbs and garlic inside the wagon to purify the air. That didn't work either. And if a mother died on the trail, the children would be split among families, raised by strangers because there was no time to mourn. This wasn't a journey. It was a trial, a gauntlet. And if you made it, if you reached Oregon or California or Colorado, you had to start over, build a home, till the land, find food, face winter, all after losing half your belongings, maybe a few loved ones, and a piece of your sanity. And what kept them going? The dream. Land of their own. Freedom from tyranny. Escape from poverty or persecution. That fragile promise kept them moving, step after brutal step. And in the next part, we'll turn our eyes to one of the most lawless, dangerous jobs in the West, the gunslinging bounty hunter, where tracking down outlaws was a gamble that often ended in a shallow grave. The sun rises again on the horizon, burning through the thin layer of morning mist. But you're not waking up on a porch with a cup of coffee in hand. You're in a dusty outpost town with one goal in mind: catching a wanted man. Because in this next chapter of your Wild West survival tale, you've taken on one of the most dangerous professions imaginable. You're a bounty hunter, not the Hollywood kind, with a snappy one-liner and a shiny revolver. You're underpaid, underfed, and always looking over your shoulder. The posters say, "Wanted, dead or alive." They mean it. You might get $50, maybe $100 for hauling in a fugitive. But that's if you survive the encounter. And most of the time, you won't. See, outlaws in the Wild West weren't cartoon villains. They were desperate, armed, and just as scared of you as you were of them. Cornering one meant inviting a gunfight, and if you flinched, you were the one getting buried. You don't have forensic labs or crime databases. All you've got is a crumpled poster, a rough sketch, and a trail colder than last night's beans. Tracking someone takes days, sometimes weeks. You sleep in shrubs, you drink from muddy streams. You camp in coyote territory. Every snapped twig could be a rattlesnake or your target waiting to shoot. And if you manage to find your man, it's not over. You've got to bring him back alive if that's what the bounty requires. And transporting a furious, shackled outlaw hundreds of miles without getting ambushed is its own kind of torture. Sometimes they bribe you. Other times they sweet talk you, promise to split the loot if you let them go. You learn not to listen. Now, maybe you're not hunting criminals. Maybe you're the law. A sheriff in a frontier town sounds noble. But think again. You've got a tin star and a reputation to protect, but you're the only thing standing between chaos and order. Guns outnumber people. Drunks shoot out windows for fun. Gangs roll in and demand tribute to leave your town standing. The jailhouse? One cell with a broken lock. You patrol the streets with your six-shooter, hoping you don't have to use it. But when that saloon brawl spills into the street or someone gets stabbed over a card game, you're the one expected to fix it. You don't call backup. You are the backup. Now step into the boots of a saloon owner. You thought you were going to run a respectable establishment? Serve up sarsaparilla and make a quiet living? Try again. Saloon life is constant tension. You're balancing gamblers, drifters, prostitutes, outlaws, and cowboys, most of whom are armed and drunk by sundown. Fights break out over spilled drinks or cheating cards. Tables get flipped, pistols drawn. Sometimes people die before they finish their whiskey. And if someone skips their tab, you'd better be good with a shotgun. You'd also better be good at managing, let's say, alternative businesses. Because in many towns, the saloon was more than just a bar. It was the brothel, the poker hall, and the hotel, all in one shaky, creaking building. And with all this lawlessness, you might think justice came quickly. It did. Too quickly. Let's talk about the vigilante mobs. You're accused of stealing a horse? Doesn't matter if you didn't do it. If a few men get riled up enough, they'll drag you out into the desert and string you up before the sheriff can blink. Trial by jury? Hardly. Sometimes justice in the Wild West was just a whisper in the wrong ear, and your fate was sealed. And speaking of sealing fates, let's talk about the dangers that don't even carry a gun. Wild animals. Rattlesnakes hide in boots. Wolves hunt your livestock. Mountain lions stalk the trails. And then there are the bears, grizzly bears to be exact. Massive, territorial, and fast. One wrong step near their den and it's over. They weren't afraid of humans. They didn't run. They charged. And with no antibiotics, if you survived the mauling, you'd likely die of infection days later. Even a simple wasp sting could be a death sentence if you had a reaction. No EpiPens out here. Just pain and waiting. Then there's fire. With dry wooden buildings packed close together, one overturned oil lamp could burn an entire town to ash in minutes. It happened more than once. Towns like Tombstone and Dodge City saw entire blocks go up in flames. And there's no fire brigade, just people with buckets and prayers. So while we picture the Wild West as thrilling and heroic, it was more often tragic and exhausting. But in the next part, we'll dig into a group of settlers who had an especially grueling experience out west. The homesteaders. The ones who stayed put, built cabins, planted crops, and faced daily survival battles on a whole different level. So, you've survived the bounty hunters, saloon fights, outlaws, and wild animals. But what if you weren't any of those? What if you were just a regular person trying to build a life in this brutal land? Welcome to the world of the homesteaders. Imagine standing on a patch of dry, untamed land. There's no house, no fence, not even a well. Just you, a wagon full of supplies, and a piece of paper from the government that says, "Congratulations, it's all yours, if you can survive 5 years." Under the Homestead Act of 1862, families could claim up to 160 acres of land. All they had to do was live on it, improve it, and stay for 5 years. It sounded like freedom, but it felt like a death sentence. First, you had to build a home, but in the middle of nowhere with no trees around, you couldn't even build a wooden cabin. So many pioneers built soddies, homes made from the very dirt beneath their feet. Layers of thick grass and packed earth, cut into bricks and stacked like Legos. These homes were damp, dark, and always crumbling. Insects lived in the walls. Snakes sometimes dropped in from the ceiling. Cozy, right? Next came the farming. You had to grow your own food or starve. But the soil was stubborn, and the weather didn't care about your survival. Spring brought floods, summer brought droughts, and winter? That was when the real nightmares began. Blizzards would roll in out of nowhere. Whiteouts so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. People froze trying to make it back to their front doors. Children died within steps of their homes, lost in the blinding snow. No plows, no warning systems, no help. And then came the locusts. You think a bug problem means a few ants in the kitchen? Try billions of locusts darkening the sky like smoke. The Great Locust Plague of 1874 wiped out entire harvests in hours. Crops vanished. Clothes were eaten off people's backs. Leather, fabric, even wood, gone. The sound of the swarm was so loud, settlers said it was like standing next to a train. And if you somehow made it through the bugs, the storms, and the starvation, there were still diseases waiting to take you down. Remember, you don't have running water. You're drinking from wells that might be contaminated. You're cooking over open fires, exposed to the elements. Children died from diarrhea, adults from infected cuts. And childbirth, a gamble every time. Most births happened at home with no doctor, just a neighbor or a midwife. If the baby got stuck or the mother bled too much, there was nothing anyone could do. And then there was the loneliness. You might go weeks without seeing another person outside your family. No phones, no internet, not even a proper letter unless the mail wagon showed up. People started talking to themselves. Some wandered off into the woods and never came back. The land had a way of breaking people, and yet they stayed. They raised barns, built schools, planted gardens. They sang, prayed, wrote letters, and tried to pretend this was home. Now, shift your gaze away from the prairie. Let's take a ride on one of the most dangerous inventions of the age, the steam locomotive. You board the train thinking it's going to be a scenic journey through the West. But it's not scenic. It's chaos on steel wheels. First of all, trains derailed. A lot. Tracks were hastily built, warped by the heat and not properly aligned. One wrong turn or mechanical failure, and the train jumped the rails, spilling passengers, livestock, and cargo into the wilderness. If you weren't crushed, you were stranded. Second, there were robberies. Yes, just like the movies. Masked bandits would ride alongside the train on horseback, leap aboard, and rob everyone at gunpoint. You could be halfway through a sandwich when someone kicked in the door and demanded your wallet. There were no secure safes. No armed guards, unless it was a military train. Just a conductor with a pocket watch and maybe a pistol in his sock. And then there was the smoke. Coal-fueled engines poured black soot into every car. Passengers arrived at their destinations looking like chimney sweeps. Lung problems? Coughing fits? Just part of the ride. But the train wasn't your only means of long-distance travel. Sometimes you had no choice but to go by stagecoach. Imagine climbing into a cramped bouncing box on wheels, packed with strangers and the smell of livestock. You'd be jolted for days, bruised from every bump in the road. Bandits loved stagecoaches. They were slow, noisy, and easy to track. And if you had valuables, you'd better hide them well or give them up quick. Still want to explore the Wild West? You haven't even faced the dust storms yet. In the next segment, we'll ride straight into the choking, blinding, soul-crushing windstorms that turned day into night and homes into tombs. Okay, saddle up, because we're about to ride headfirst into one of the most terrifying forces of nature on the frontier: dust storms. Imagine standing outside and in the distance the horizon turns brown, then black. A giant wall of dust taller than a building is roaring toward you, moving so fast it looks like it's alive. You run, inside, anywhere, but it's too late. The dust pours in through cracks in your door, under the windows, through the roof. You wrap wet cloths around your face, stuff rags in the cracks, but nothing stops it. The storm howls like a living thing. The wind lashes at your house. Dust gets into your eyes, your ears, your mouth. You can't see a foot in front of you. These black blizzards, as they were sometimes called, weren't just rare events. They happened often on the prairies, especially in areas where overfarming stripped the land bare. No grass meant no roots to hold the soil. One strong gust and entire farms turned to airborne grit. People choked to death. Animals suffocated in their stalls. Machinery clogged up. Food was contaminated. And when it was over, you didn't just sweep it up. You shoveled it out, bucket by bucket. Entire families woke up buried in their beds. Walls collapsed. Livestock disappeared. If it rained afterward, the dust turned to sludge, suffocating crops and clogging every path. Living in the Wild West wasn't just about surviving outlaws or snakes. It was about surviving the earth itself turning against you. And if nature didn't get you, loneliness just might. Let's take a moment to step into the mind of someone completely isolated. You're miles from the nearest town. You haven't seen another face outside your family in weeks. The silence is so loud, it buzzes in your ears. And then one of your kids gets sick. Really sick. No phone, no car. The nearest doctor is a day's ride away if the weather holds. You try old remedies, boil willow bark, whisper prayers, but sometimes the prairie just takes. And the pain of burying a child in frozen soil behind your cabin, it stays with you forever. Death was an everyday visitor. So common, people became emotionally numb. In frontier towns, cemeteries were filled before the ink dried on their founding papers. They buried people with no names, no markers, just mounds of dirt and wooden crosses, and a prayer whispered in the wind. But despite the odds, some people thrived out here. You had to be tough, rugged, a little mad, honestly. You grew your own food, patched your own wounds, built your own home, and made your own laws. Because remember, law enforcement in the Wild West, almost non-existent. If you were lucky, your town had a sheriff, but he was probably an ex-drunk with a rusty badge and a grudge. Most lawmen were outgunned and underpaid, and half of them used to be criminals themselves. If someone robbed you, or worse, you were often on your own. Vigilante justice was the norm. Hangings in the square, shootouts at high noon, revenge killings in the dark. It wasn't just romantic legend. It was survival. Even towns that looked civilized, like Dodge City or Tombstone, were barely holding together. Gambling, drinking, fighting, these weren't occasional distractions. They were how people coped with the endless stress. And women? Well, they didn't have it easier. Most women in the Wild West weren't glamorous saloon girls or tough cowgirls. They were working themselves to the bone every single day. They woke before dawn, tended to animals, cooked for 10 people, hauled water, chopped wood, and still managed to sew clothes and raise children. No electricity, no medicine, no relief. And for those who didn't live on farms, many ended up in brothels. Not by choice, but because it was the only way to survive. Prostitution was often the only job where a woman could earn enough to feed herself. Some madams were wealthy and powerful, but most women lived in fear of violence, disease, and exploitation. And the moment they got sick or pregnant, they were thrown out and replaced. There was no safety net, only survival. Even in towns where churches and schools were springing up, life remained brutal. Because out here, it wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about morality. It was about making it to the next day. In the next segment, we're riding into the world of medicine, or rather what passed for it. And trust me, the Wild West doctor might just be scarier than the gunslingers. Welcome back to the dusty plains of the Wild West, where survival wasn't just about grit or luck. It was about enduring the impossible. And now we're diving into a chapter that gets downright unsettling. Frontier medicine. Imagine this. You're out fixing a fence post. Your hand slips, rusty nail, deep cut. Today you'd rinse it, maybe get a tetanus shot, slap on some antibiotics, done. But here, that little cut could kill you. You'd stumble back to town, hoping there's someone with any medical knowledge. And let's be honest, what you'll probably find is a barber with a bone saw. Doctors in the Wild West? A mixed bag at best. Some were trained in Europe, others learned through apprenticeships. And many, well, they just called themselves doctors. There were no licenses, no regulations, just a sign, a chair, and some sharp tools. Got a fever? You'd be bled. Got a cough? Here, try this mixture of opium and whiskey. Got a toothache? That'll be pliers and no anesthetic. Pain relief was a shot of alcohol and someone to hold you down. There were stories, real ones, of people getting limbs amputated on kitchen tables, biting down on leather straps while someone counted to 3. Infection? Almost guaranteed. Sterilization? Not a thing. Doctors didn't wash hands between patients. Surgical instruments were reused, uncleaned, and antibiotics? Still decades away. So if you got sick, truly sick, your odds weren't great. Even childbirth, a natural event, turned lethal far too often. Women died from blood loss, infection, or simply exhaustion. Midwives did their best, but without proper training or supplies, many births ended in tragedy. And if you were lucky enough to survive the delivery, there was still the chance that both you and your newborn would catch something from the dirty linens and unclean water used during the process. It's easy to forget how deadly life used to be, until you remember that even a stomachache could signal hot appendicitis, and the only solution was a blind incision and a prayer. But as brutal as medicine was, people still turned to it. Because what else was there? They believed in home remedies. Spider webs for wounds, mustard plasters for chest pain, whiskey for pretty much everything. Native American herbal knowledge was sometimes passed along, but rarely respected, despite often being far more effective than the European techniques brought west. Then there were the traveling doctors, snake oil salesmen. They rolled into town with bright wagons and wild claims. Cure-all tonics made from turpentine, morphine, and crushed beetles. Guaranteed to restore youth, heal wounds, grow hair, and make you immortal. People bought them by the bottle, because when you're desperate, hope is worth more than truth. And yet somehow, some people lived. They endured the fevers, the fractures, the childbirths, and came out the other side. Scarred, yes. Changed, definitely. But alive. And those survivors, they became legends. Now you might be thinking, surely life got easier once towns grew, once railroads came through, once civilization arrived? Not quite. Because as much as the Wild West was shaped by harsh conditions and rough people, it was also carved by big money and the ruthless men behind it. So in the next part, we're riding straight into the world of railroad tycoons, land barons, and the true power brokers of the West. And believe me, It wasn't always the man with the fastest draw who held all the cards. Welcome back, partner. You've survived the dust storms, the amputations, and the lawless chaos. But now it's time to meet the real kings of the Wild West, the men who never needed guns to conquer the frontier. We're talking about railroad tycoons, cattle barons, and land speculators, the true power behind the boomtowns. Forget cowboys. These were the men who built empires with pens, papers, and bribes. Let's start with the railroads. In the late 1800s, steel tracks stretched like veins across the open land, connecting cities, transporting cattle, moving people west. But every mile of track wasn't just metal. It was blood, sweat, and deception. Railroad companies were given massive swaths of land by the government, millions of acres. They'd sell off parts, jack up prices, and push settlers out of the way. If your home happened to be in the path of progress, tough luck. They called it eminent domain. And they weren't above violence. They hired private security forces like the Pinkertons, notorious for their brutality. Strike too hard against the railroad, and men in black coats would show up at your door. Then came the cattle barons, men who controlled entire regions with herds numbering in the tens of thousands. They owned land the size of small countries. Their brand was law. And if you were a small-time rancher or farmer, you didn't stand a chance. Cattle would trample your crops, and if you dared complain, your house might accidentally catch fire one night. No one could prove anything. And the sheriff? Probably on the baron's payroll. In places like Wyoming and Texas, barons formed associations, essentially private governments, deciding who could graze where and who needed to move along. Many hired gunmen to patrol their fences. The same cowboys you see in movies? They were often just hired muscle, paid to protect someone else's fortune. And let's not forget land speculators, men who bought up huge territories for pennies and resold them at enormous profit. They tricked settlers with promises of fertile land. While maps were often forged or conveniently optimistic, you'd buy land, build a home, and months later discover that the water rights belonged to someone else, or that your land was technically still native territory and you had no legal claim at all. But by then it was too late. You'd sold everything back east. You had nowhere else to go. This wasn't just exploitation. It was systemic, institutional theft. And who paid the highest price? The ones who'd already lived on this land for generations. Native American tribes. Throughout the 19th century, Native peoples were systematically displaced, attacked, and marginalized. Their lands were sold off, their treaties broken, their cultures suppressed. Reservation life was harsh. Supplies promised by the U.S. government often arrived late, or not at all. Families starved. Children were taken to boarding schools, stripped of their language and identity. And yet, despite it all, many communities survived. They preserved songs, stories, and resistance in the face of cultural erasure. But make no mistake, for settlers and native peoples alike, the Wild West wasn't a land of freedom. It was a chessboard. And if you weren't born a king, you were a pawn, pushed across dry soil, sacrificed when convenient. Still, people came, because the dream of the West was powerful. Gold, land, freedom, escape. So in the next part, we'll dig into one of the most seductive promises of all. Gold. And how the gold rush turned ordinary people into greedy monsters and peaceful lands into battlegrounds. Get ready, because nothing corrupted the soul of the Wild West faster than the shimmer of buried treasure. Welcome back, wanderer. You've seen the grit, the greed, and the grit again. But now, we're digging into one of the most explosive forces that shaped the Wild West, gold. That shimmering metal didn't just change lives, it ruined them. It started in 1848 when James Marshall found gold flakes in the American River near Sutter's Mill in California. Just like that, a tidal wave of humanity surged westward. Thousands from the East Coast, from China, from South America, all chasing the same dream. Strike it rich, escape poverty, rewrite your story. Sounds romantic, right? Well, not quite. Let's start with the journey. If you were coming from the East Coast, you had two options. Sail down around Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. A brutal, months-long voyage through ice storms, hurricanes, and sickness. Or take a shortcut through the Panama Isthmus, which meant hacking your way through mosquito-infested jungles with no guarantee you'd make it to the other side alive. Once you reached California, reality hit fast. The gold wasn't just sitting there waiting to be scooped up. By the time most people arrived, the rivers had been picked over. All that was left were backbreaking jobs in deep mines, surrounded by choking dust, collapsing tunnels, and lethal gas pockets. If you were lucky, you might find a few nuggets, just enough to keep you hungry for more. If you weren't lucky, you'd lose everything: your money, your health, even your life. And yet, more people kept coming. Boomtowns exploded overnight, scrappy clusters of tents and saloons built around gold claims. With no law, no order, and no plan, they became breeding grounds for violence. Guns settled most disputes. If someone jumped your claim or accused you of stealing, there was no court, just a loaded Colt revolver and a half-drunken jury. Sometimes justice was swift. Sometimes it was just revenge dressed up as righteousness. And then there was greed, pure, insatiable greed. Men killed for pinches of gold dust. Partners betrayed each other in the dead of night. Women were auctioned off in gambling dens, and children worked 14-hour days in bone-chilling riverbeds. And what about the native peoples who had lived on these lands for centuries? They were bulldozed, literally and figuratively. Their rivers were dammed, their lands blasted with high-pressure hoses that carved entire hillsides into mud just to sift out a few ounces of gold. Their homes vanished under the weight of this golden madness. But the gold rush wasn't just a California story. It spread: Nevada, Colorado, the Black Hills, Alaska. Wherever rumors of treasure surfaced, people followed. And wherever they went, they brought lawlessness, destruction, and a twisted kind of hope. Businesses cashed in too. A single shovel could cost more than a week's pay. Miners were charged $5 for eggs, $10 for boots, and their souls for whiskey. And those who didn't mine, they got rich by fleecing the miners. Saloon owners, supply sellers, and land grabbers made fortunes while dreamers starved. Not everyone lost, of course. Some struck it rich, some became legends. But most died broke or broken. Their bones buried in forgotten cemeteries, their names washed away like silt in the stream. Gold in the Wild West was never just wealth. It was obsession. It was madness. And it left scars on people, on mountains, and on the soul of a young nation. Now, we're almost at the end of this long, brutal day. But before we hang up our hat, there's one more shadow we need to walk through. In the next part, we're entering the final chilling truth of the Wild West. Death. How it stalked every corner, on horseback, behind saloon doors, under the hot sun, and how the people of the frontier dealt with it. And how you would have faced it too. You've trudged through the grit, greed, and glory of the Wild West. But now we're stepping into something even more universal: death. Because if there's one thing you could count on out here, it was that death never took a day off. It didn't matter if you were an outlaw, a preacher, a saloon girl, or just a kid hoping for a better life. Death was always close. Sometimes it rode in with a bullet. Sometimes it came in the form of bad water, bad meat, or worse, bad luck. Let's start with disease. In towns with no plumbing and no sanitation, illness spread like wildfire. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery. Words that sound old-fashioned now but were once daily terrors. People would get sick in the morning and be dead by nightfall. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no real doctors. Just whiskey, superstition, and a whole lot of praying. Childbirth? A gamble with death every single time. Women gave birth in filthy rooms, with unwashed hands and no anesthesia. If the baby survived, it was a miracle. If both mother and child did, that was rare enough to be talked about for years. Gunfights get all the glory in the movies, but real gunfights were fast, much sloppy, and brutal. You didn't always die right away. You might bleed out in the dirt while strangers rifled through your pockets. Or worse, survive long enough to suffer a slow, painful infection from a bullet wound. And even if you weren't part of a shootout, stray bullets were a constant threat. Saloon brawls, drunk arguments, robberies gone wrong. It didn't take much to turn a normal day into a deadly one. And then there were the hangings. Justice on the frontier wasn't blind. It was often drunk, angry, and heavily armed. If you were accused of a crime, real or imagined, you'd be dragged into a kangaroo court or no court at all. Judge, jury, and executioner could all be the same person. Public hangings were common, sometimes as punishment, sometimes just to make a point. People brought their kids, vendors sold snacks, and newspapers published every gruesome detail like it was entertainment. But the most terrifying part? You didn't even need to commit a crime to end up dead. Step onto the wrong man's land, get caught in the crossfire, look the wrong way at someone in a bar. That was enough. And when someone died, how were they remembered? Sometimes with a wooden cross hastily planted in dry soil, sometimes with nothing at all, buried in unmarked graves, lost to time. There weren't always preachers or proper funerals. There wasn't always time to mourn. Life moved too fast. Some towns had boot hills, cemeteries named after the men buried there who died with their boots on. It was meant to sound noble, but really it just meant you died violently. The undertaker, if there was one, had a booming business. And coffins? If you were poor, you might not get one at all. Sometimes death was expected. Other times it arrived with no warning. A snake bite, a spooked horse, a fall from a rooftop. That was the Wild West. Everything could kill you, and no one was guaranteed tomorrow. So why did people keep coming? Maybe it was the dream. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe it was just the human spirit, stubborn, hopeful, and always chasing something better. But here's the truth. If you stepped into the Wild West hoping to thrive or even survive, you were gambling with everything you had. And most people lost. In the final part, we'll take one last look around at the myths that remain, the stories we still tell, and the real legacy of a land too wild to tame. Well, partner, you made it. 16 segments deep into the dust, danger, and raw survival that was the American Wild West. Now it's time to pull back the curtain and ask, what did it all mean? What legacy did this brutal frontier really leave behind? Let's start with the obvious. The Wild West wasn't as wild as the movies made it seem. No slow-motion duels at high noon, no noble outlaws with hearts of gold, no sheriff always one step ahead. What you had instead was chaos, desperation, people clinging to survival by their fingernails. It was ordinary folks doing extraordinary things, and sometimes horrifying things, just to see another sunrise. And yet, despite all that darkness, the Wild West still glows in our imagination. Why? Because it represents something powerful. Freedom. The chance to start over. To carve out your own piece of the world with your bare hands. To rewrite your name, your story, your destiny. But the price of that freedom was everything. You could die of thirst, disease, violence, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. There were no safety nets, no second chances, no one coming to rescue you. The Wild West stripped you down to your core. It didn't care about your background, your accent, or your dreams. It cared only about grit, and even that wasn't always enough. And then there's the myth of the cowboy, so deeply baked into pop culture that we forget most of them weren't white, weren't clean cut, and weren't heroes. Many were former slaves. Many were Mexican vaqueros. Many were indigenous people trying to survive a world being stolen from them. Their stories were complicated. Their lives were hard, and they rarely got the happy ending Hollywood promised. Even the towns themselves, those wooden sidewalks, swinging saloon doors, and dusty streets, vanished just as fast as they appeared. Many became ghost towns, swallowed by time, left to rot under desert skies. But if you listen closely, they're still whispering, telling stories of gamblers and gunslingers, of hard-working families and lawless drifters, of a country expanding too fast, too far, too recklessly. And maybe that's the real reason we're still fascinated. Because the Wild West isn't just history, it's a mirror. It shows us what people become when there are no rules, no comforts, just survival. So, the next time you slip under your clean sheets, pour a glass of water from the tap, or walk into a store with more than 2 cans of beans on the shelf, remember the people who didn't have those luxuries, who built lives out of dust and danger, and who wouldn't have made it without a little madness and a lot of luck. You, my friend, wouldn't survive a day in the Wild West. But now, you've survived the story. Thanks for spending the night with the Sleepy Historian. If this journey left you awestruck, shaken, or just a little more grateful for modern plumbing, consider hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing this tale with someone else who'd never make it past high noon. Until next time, sleep well and dream of quieter frontiers.